bullets and shutters with shell, and in 5 minutes flat, well, he'd blown us to hell. He nearly blew us right back to Australia. And the band played Waltzing Matilda as we stopped for the Perry-Arse Lane. Well, we buried ours, and the Turks buried theirs, and we started all over again.
Now you can hear me. Hello, I'm Rosemary Addington. I've been a member of London Region CND for quite a long time, and I've now taken on the job of Vice Chair, so this is my first job, which is to introduce this session. Oh, thank you. Thank you. The three speakers that we have here to speak on our last session have only, unfortunately, got 8 minutes each, I've been told, because we've overrun a bit and nobody wants to go home late after a whole day here. So first, I won't say much to introduce them at all. Most people, I think, will know them all. This is Kelvin Hopkins, who is the Labour MP for Luton North, and he's going to speak first on the subject that you all have, which is alternatives to nuclear weapons and war. So let's hope we can find some. Kelvin.
Thank you very much. This is being applauded before I've spoken. Maybe you want to hope you'll applaud afterwards as well. But my name's Kelvin Hopkins, Labour Member of Parliament for Luton North. But more important than that is that I've been a member of CND for getting on for 60 years. I found a photograph of myself today playing in my jazz group in 1960 with my C&D badge, so I've got evidence that I have actually been involved all the time. I also was on the largest of the Aldermaston marches in 1962, marched all the way from Aldermaston to London. I had the experience of going into Hyde Park. We went into Hyde Park on that occasion and been through a particular gate. And exactly 40 years later, and I heard Michael Foot speak on the platform, of course, great campaigner against nuclear weapons. And 40 years later, exactly, I walked through the same gate on the march against the Iraq War and heard Michael Foot speaking on the same platform. Deja vu or what? But what I never expected was that almost 60 years on since I joined CND, I would still be campaigning to get rid of these dreadful weapons. I'm now doing my best in Parliament in my small way. I'm Labour's Vice Chair of the Parliamentary CND group. Our leader has deserted us, of course, because he's become leader of the Labour Party. And Jeremy was chair well, he may still possibly be chair of Parliamentary CND, but he's not an active chair, so to speak. So Caroline Lucas has been chairing us recently, but as a result of that, we had a meeting last week, and I've kindly been given an early day motion by CND staff, by Russell, who's written this motion about President-elect Trump and nuclear weapons. We live in very dangerous times. I have to say I was pleased, if that's the right word, to have heard the previous session, because it was quite terrifying, but I feel much better informed. But when we have somebody as volatile as Donald Trump, the most powerful person in the world, it is very worrying. But the early day motion quotes two things he said. On 22nd December, he said that the US must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability. And a bit later he said, let it be an arms race. Well, it's very frightening, and irresponsible language, if nothing else. But then a little time ago he said also, the biggest problem we have is nuclear proliferation. And having some maniac, having some madman go out and get a nuclear weapon. That, in my opinion, is the single biggest problem that our country faces right now. The fact that the man is completely schizophrenic about the nuclear weapons is interesting, if not deeply worrying. But at least he doesn't appear to be in the normal round of neocons who want to go out and fight a war. A bit more of an isolationist, if anything. But there is this tension, this standoff with Russia, and there's all sorts of rumours floating about attitudes to Russia. The fact that he seems to have some kind of relationship with Putin, and Putin is not everybody's favourite person either, but they have some kind of relationship is better than having other people secretly preparing for a potential war. And it's interesting that just days before he takes over, substantial numbers of troops from NATO being moved into Poland, and the British troops being moved into the Baltic states just before Trump gets there. Is this a coincidence? I don't know, but it's at least possible that they're trying to get as much under the door before it closes. Trump takes over. But the early day motion it's just been put down. It won't be actually in Parliament, received in Parliament until Monday, but it will be there. I've got copies if anybody would like copies from before you go, to say that we are doing our bit. Another interesting thing, these are just anecdotes, but some 10 years or so ago, it was the 40th anniversary of War on Want, and I hosted the 40th anniversary celebration at the House of Commons. And an elderly woman, elderly lady indeed, was there, and I didn't know who she was, and I had a chat, and it turned out to be Mary Wilson, Harold Wilson's wife. And, and she has just had her 101st birthday, I think yesterday. But I was having a talk with her, and so I said I'd been in CND and I'd CND march. She said, "Oh yes, when you used to walk up Whitehall with the CND demonstrations, I wanted to come and join you, but Harold wouldn't let me." So we got Mary Wilson on side, and she's a great person. But foreign policy is a very very dangerous, and we have to hope that there are sensible people behind the scenes who are trying to calm things down. When it comes to alternatives to nuclear weapons, we've got to look at Trident first of all. That's our own weapon. Well, I mean, the weapons are actually provided by America, but the system is British, and a lot of the work goes into it is British. We want to see Trident got rid of. We have to convince trade unionists and voters that it's a good idea. But when we do that, we have to say what we're going to do instead, and particularly for the jobs. I mean, the trade unions they're not that worried so much about having a defence capability, a nuclear defence capability. What they're concerned about is the jobs. Well, let us say, well, there will be no loss of jobs. First of all, decommissioning Trident will take some time. Quite a lot of highly qualified nuclear engineers and everyone from basic engineers to high-flown physicists and so on to do that job. We've got also nuclear power not far away. There's going to be a massive job for the foreseeable future of dealing with nuclear waste from nuclear power. Some of you may have seen that book published last week by my good friend Professor Andy Blowers about the waste and how we deal with waste from there. But that will absorb, I think, vast numbers of people with nuclear skills. To just dealing with the waste bill. That's even if Hinkley doesn't go ahead, and let's hope Hinkley doesn't go ahead. I think it's at least possible it won't go ahead. But there will be need for people to do those jobs. But then we've got to look at alternative energy systems. We could easily have, if we have a Labour government which is prepared to use the state to replace jobs, we can just put into Barrow in Furnace and elsewhere more offshore wind technology, offshore tidal technology. Just build it in Barrow and say, well, your jobs will be secure for the future because we're going to put jobs in there. If you leave it simply to the market, it won't necessarily happen. But we are, I think, moving towards a world where we're going to have to use the state again to create jobs, make a world where we all have something to do. And I think that, especially if Jeremy becomes Prime Minister, and I look forward to that very, very much indeed, we can see a Prime Minister who's prepared to do that sort of thing. So, right, we will use the state to put jobs in there, to build things which are necessary, like offshore wind farms, and we can easily find things to do. I think another thought is possibly people might be less enthusiastic about, but I think we are desperately short of coastal patrol boats, for example. And if we're looking at protecting our shores, looking at policing our fishing grounds after we come out of the EU, that sort of thing, we will need, I think we've only got 2 of these boats at the moment. We could say, well, let's build some more of them. Let's build some more at Barrow in Furnace and elsewhere and on the Clyde. So there are things we can do. Just a question of will. When it comes to wars, the Second World War is almost like within a year or two, we had effectively a socialist regime planning the war. Decisions were made, and things were done to make sure we got it right. So I think there are lots of things that can be done, even to replace directly those jobs that will be affected by abandoning our nuclear weapons. I like to think that even possibly a coalition government would be okay. The SNP, I have to say, are very, very sound on these matters. I'm not in other ways necessarily in support of the SNP, but they recently had a backbench debate calling for the abolition of Trident. There was only one speaker from the Labour Party who spoke in support of their motion, that was myself. And there are only 6 of us who voted with them in the lobbies, which were myself, Dennis Skinner, Ronnie Campbell, and 3 other, I can't remember 3 others, but it was 6 of us anyway. But so I think we broke the Labour whip. The Labour whip was to abstain, but I wasn't going to abstain on that, so I voted with the SNP against Trident. I'm coming to the end of my words, I'm sorry, but I hope I've said enough to show you that there is a voice in Parliament for you. I'm one of you, have been all my life, and will continue to be so. So, be assured there is a voice in Parliament for nuclear disarmament, for peace, and for bringing the world together and avoiding war in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelvin. It's nice to have something more cheerful after the last session, which was hard to follow and horrible and very necessary, but thank you. That was good to hear. And so I think we're going to follow the order on the paper. Are we on Kate next? Or? Yeah. So I'm sure everybody knows Kate Hudson, who's chair of CND, and welcome.
Thanks very much, Rosemary. It's very good to be here. You've obviously had an action-packed and very interesting day. If I could just start off, this is really a message for longer-standing London Region members, but one of your fellow members over many years, Pat Arrowsmith, some of you will know she's in hospital. She's now recovering very well from pneumonia. I told her I was coming here today, and she said that would I convey to you all her greetings and solidarity for the work that you're undertaking. So that's a message for Pat, from Pat. So this is the question, isn't it? What are the alternatives to nuclear weapons and war? And I'm sure we all agree that not only does there have to be another way of doing things, but we can all see clearly what those ways are. To have society, relations between people, between states, between communities that are not based on killing, on warfare, on possession of nuclear weapons and so on, that we want to see the kind of society which is just, humane and respectful. So is this realisable, or is it just a utopian fantasy? I know that our leaders, our political leaders, most of them would suggest that we're living on some kind of cloud cuckoo land and we're not thinking about reality as it is. I suppose one of the points that people sometimes make to me from the pro-Trident perspective is, oh, well, yeah, it's all very well, it'd be nice to get rid of them, but you can't uninvent them, so we can't get rid of them, regard to nuclear weapons. Well, I think that we all understand why that is absolutely wrong. But the vision of an alternative is something that has been with us for a very, very long time. Well over a century, peace organisations, states and so on have been meeting together to work out how alternative ways of relating can be developed. And of course, I think that many of you will have also heard Tony Benn, the late great Tony Benn, quoting from the UN Charter, which was a very powerful thing, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind. Well, I think now we can add many, many more than twice to that list, but that vision of ending that is something that is a powerful thing. It's also shared by the overwhelming majority of people globally, but not only individuals and campaign groups and so on, but also by states as well. I think what Kelvin just quoted from President-elect Trump shows us that, of course, there are many powerful obstacles to realising that vision of a different type of world. And if I could read out Trump's entire tweet about nuclear weapons from just before Christmas, he said, "The United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes." Well, I'm sure we can all think immediately of many ways in which that tweet is wrong, dangerous, and ignorant. I mean, first of all, if you just take US nuclear capacity, which he wants to increase, they already have 7,300 nuclear warheads delivered by land, sea and air, with plans to spend over 350 billion more over the next decade modernising and maintaining them. Isn't that enough for Trump? You know, it's already the ability to destroy all life many times over. But his ignorance about nuclear matters is extremely alarming, given that he is going to very shortly have his finger on the nuclear button. And I'm sure we were all alarmed to hear that he is determined to tear up the nuclear deal with Iran, and he is encouraging nuclear proliferation. And he particularly referenced Japan and South Korea, and again, which Kelvin touched on. He said he'd be okay about an arms race in Asia. Okay, well, alarming indeed. But aside from it being sort of slightly humorous, if it wasn't so terrifyingly dangerous, he is actually, in being pro-proliferation, abandoning the bipartisan policy which US presidents have had for many decades. So it's an absolutely major shift in US policy. But I think that the most wrong, if I can put it like that, part of his tweet is him saying, until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes. Well, only 9 countries have nuclear weapons. The rest of the world has come to its senses, or actually never left its senses with regard to nuclear weapons. It's the United States and the other nuclear weapon states who need to come to their senses. And I think that has never been clearer than it is today. And I'm sure you're all aware that last month the United Nations General Assembly voted to start negotiations on a global nuclear weapons ban treaty, and those negotiations are starting in March. Now, when it came to voting in the UN, the overwhelming majority of states voted in favour of starting the negotiations. Who were the main people against? The United States, the UK, and some other of the nuclear weapon states. In fact, interestingly, China, India and Pakistan abstained on the vote, and North Korea voted in favour of negotiating a ban treaty. So, you know, very, very small number of places need to come to their senses with regard to nuclear weapons. And I think it's not surprising that many, many states are absolutely adamant that nuclear weapons have got to stop, because there's an increasing amount of very detailed information, scientific evidence and so on, of a whole range of ways in which nuclear weapons are bad, you know, not just the normal ones we have. I was looking at a very interesting new paper from Chatham House, which concludes that nuclear weapons pose overwhelming dangers to global health, development, climate, social structures and human rights. You know, so it's not just the mushroom cloud, it's bad for every conceivable thing. And I do recommend that you look at that, because there's very detailed information there, in particular the impact on the climate, for example, of even a small nuclear war, and the kind of environmental effects that that would have, to the extent that it's now raising legal questions. And a panel of experts are looking into how the legal consequences of nuclear weapons use mean, or the kind of the consequences of their use raise ways in which sort of legal obstacles to production, deployment and detonation of nuclear weapons can be used through international humanitarian law. You know, so there are all kinds of new forms of argumentation. So it's the realisation of facts such as those that contribute to the determination of the majority to ban nuclear weapons. Now, our tasks, if I've got a moment, Chair, just to obviously we want to work out how we can make this vision of a nuclear-free world more real. Two priorities from CND for the year ahead, and I'm sure shared by all other anti-nuclear and anti-war campaigning organisations. One is to continue the work now to cancel Trident, and of course parliamentary CND is really very central to that task. And then twinned with that, because they're two sides of the same coin, not only British nuclear disarmament, but also working to support the global ban. You know, this is absolutely central. If you've got the majority of states in the world fighting for that ban, our job is to bring the British government to the negotiating table. You know, they're always saying, oh no, we don't want to just scrap Trident, we're multilateral. Well, here's this big multilateral opportunity. They should be seizing it, participating it, and not standing to one side and shunning it. So can I urge you then, colleagues, this year to do everything you can to continue the cancellation of Trident work and to support the global nuclear ban. One key way for that is 1st of March we have a parliamentary lobby to encourage the government to participate in the negotiations at the UN. So if you can, please do come along to that 1st of March in Parliament. Thank you very much.
Very much, Kate, and let's hope we have lots of people at the lobby. I'm sure everybody here has got to come. We hope. Thank you. Now, Anne Feltham has been working for CAAT for a very long time, I do know, which is wonderful. And most people possibly know that CAAT has recently been taking out endeavouring to take out a judicial review, or is it actually underway? It's underway, against Saudi Arabia and its treatment of Yemen using what are, I think, incontrovertibly British weapons. So we're very interested to hear from Kate, who is our last speaker. Anne is our last speaker.
Yes, I have been working for Campaign Against Arms Trade for a very long while. I've been on the staff since 1985.
Wow.
So it's just a long while. And I think it's quite interesting that this year of all years, I think we've got our best opportunity to actually, of all those years, to raise the issue of the arms trade and to really challenge it. And there's a couple of things. I've been asked mostly to talk about Saudi Arabia, and that's what I'll come on to. But this legal action on Saudi Arabia has got huge amounts of press interest. The government's clearly worried about it because it's put up its top lawyer, and that the man who tried to defend them on the Brexit review, he's also leading the team against us. So there's going to be a lot of information about that, but I'll go on to that. But the other thing that's happening this year is that every second year the big arms fair is held in London in September, the Dicey Arms Fair, and this is one of those years. So there's going to be massive on the streets protests. Planning's already well underway against that arms fair in September, and in particular protests during the run-up to it, because people are hoping that they can disrupt its setup. So together, those two events that are happening in 2017 give us a really good chance to raise the horrors of the arms trade. And the arms trade is a government-backed enterprise which benefits some of the arms companies, the people in the arms companies, but nobody else really. And that's been the way for a very long while. And just before going on to Saudi Arabia, I want to mention that since 1966, the UK government has had an arms sales agency, civil servants whose only job it is to promote UK arms sales. It was set up by Dennis Healey. It's had support from every government that's been in since. Gordon Brown perhaps tried to close it down, but he didn't really succeed. Now it's called the Defence and Security Organisation, and it's located within the new Department of International Trade, and it's got about 130 staff just pushing UK arms exports. And it is that Defence and Security Organisation which issues the official invitations to the arms fairs. They're now run by private kind of exhibition companies, but the official links to the UK government is through that Defence and Security Organisation. So we're talking about an industry that is very much supported by government, an industry that is probably one of the only manufacturing industries left in the UK. The others have been left to go to the wall. The arms industries just have backing after backing. But moving on to Saudi Arabia, which is what Carol asked me mostly to come and talk about, I think it's worth saying it is the biggest customer for UK arms, and it's worth remembering that if you challenge arms sales to Saudi Arabia, you're actually challenging the whole of the UK's arms trade. It's what makes it tick. You could stop, say, arms sales to Brazil or something or somewhere else without a huge consequence overall. But for the arms companies and their backers in the UK government, it is absolutely fundamental to it that they are allowed to keep arming Saudi Arabia. So the challenge is really to the whole trade. Until up till the beginning of 2015, we'd been plugging on all the time about Saudi Arabia because it was this big customer. And we'd tried to raise the issue of human rights, that you shouldn't be arming a country with such an appalling human rights record, that even if the arms aren't used by that country, the fact that the UK is willing to kind of flog arms to it still gives it international credibility. We tried desperately to raise that issue, and it always sort of fell on a bit of deaf ears. You could talk about arms sales to Indonesia, people got it, or Chile further back, or the links with Israel. But Saudi Arabia, we found it very difficult to raise. But in the beginning of 2015, they flogged Raif Badawi, the author in Saudi Arabia, and suddenly there were people who were seeing Saudi Arabia as an appalling country to do business with. And then, of course, in March that year, Saudi Arabia started bombing Yemen. And so they couldn't just say that the equipment that was being supplied by the UK was sitting there. It was now actually being used in fighting. And since the beginning of that war in Yemen, in March 2015, there have been absolutely consistent reports of breaches of international humanitarian law from the UN panel of experts, from Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and everybody else. The only people who don't accept that there's been these major breaches of international humanitarian law seem to be the UK government. So there are two big contracts with Saudi Arabia, both for military aircraft. They were negotiated in the 1980s, the first lot, the Al Yamama deal, and then in the 2007 till about to 2014, the Eurofighter Typhoon sales. BAE Systems is the main contractor, and BAE got government support the whole way through. It also got support for Prince Charles when they couldn't finalise the finances. So Prince Charles went to Saudi and they did finalise those finances. These contracts are government-to-government contracts. So these big contracts, the government has a deal, the UK government has a contract with the Saudi government, and then the UK government has a similar contract with BAE Systems as the prime contractor. So the government is right in the heart of these sales. And within the UK government, there is a body called MODSAP, which stands for Ministry of Defence Saudi Armed Forces Project. And of those, about 200 staff of this who are UK civil servants and military personnel, and they do nothing but support those Saudi arms deals. That's a bit of the Ministry of Defence. Saudi Arabia picks up the bill, but these are UK officials working for them. In addition to that, BAE Systems has about 5,700 employees in Saudi Arabia. Some of them will be Saudi nationals, but quite a large number are UK expats. So the scale of this is phenomenal. It's the UK government working hand in hand with the arms industry. Now, the UK government, if you want to sell arms overseas, or a whole range of military equipment, you need an export licence. That's dealt with by the Export Control Organisation, which is also actually within the Department of International Trade. But I do think there are some quite strong, there's differences there. There is quite a strong wall between these two bits of the same department. The export licences are granted against certain criteria, which are UK national criteria, EU criteria, and now there's an arms trade treaty international criteria. The UK government is very proud that it took a lead in getting these international agreements through, and it did. So the UK kind of criteria came first and the West added on. But what is quite clear from these criteria is that you should not grant an export licence if there is a clear risk that the equipment might be used in serious violations of international humanitarian law. And that is right at the crux of this court case we're bringing. The court case is being heard in the High Court between the 7th and 9th of February. We are saying that there is clear evidence, accepted by everybody except the UK government, that the Saudis are breaking international humanitarian law. The UK government accepts the equipment is being used. They accept that BA's fighter jets and Raytheon paveway bombs manufactured in Scotland are being used in Yemen, but they're saying there isn't clear evidence that they are being used. Anyway, we're challenging them this, and we think we've got in with a very good chance in winning this judicial review. Although our lawyers are always cautious, says it depends on which side of bed the judge got up in the morning. But it's a very strong case, and having seen, which I can't discuss, but having seen some of the government's evidence, yes, I do think it's quite a strong case. So that's from the 7th to 9th February. And I'll just finish, because I've been told it's the end, by saying that we'll hear the jobs argument. It's been mentioned earlier, but I think you've said what I would have said about it. Military export jobs only account for 0.2% of total employment. It's a teeny amount, which and these are highly skilled workers, and they could be solving our energy problems rather than working on arms sales. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And I'm sure we're all looking forward to that case, and fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sorry everybody's had rather a short time, but that was so that we could have some questions. So at least 4, I should think. And yeah, okay. Gentleman there, first of all.
I was very interested in Kelvin's reference to the changing nature of work, because I've been involved in my union, which is Unite, in pushing the issue of the decline of work, as it's called, and the rise of the gig economy. And also, I'm very interested to hear what Kate said about the changing international climate relating to the abolition of nuclear weaponry. Because I think both in terms of the broader general and the particular United Kingdom situation, that there might be a case here for developing some sort of permanent initiative including a parliamentary element, which would be quite important, to look at how we manage the decline of work, and in the course of which would offer opportunities to move people away from the nuclear industry and the nuclear weapons industries, to which too much working class interest has been nailed to and represents a barrier to us achieving our aims as CND, because popular opinion is swayed by the necessity of paying your mortgage.
Chair, before you take the next contribution, could I just ask, some of you came in without registering, that's fine, but if you would like to be either on the SOAS CND mailing list or London Region mailing list, please can you put your address on the sheet that we're going to circulate? Sorry.
That's right. Okay, thank you.
Can I just mention Lucas Aerospace as well?
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah, you've mentioned it. Is that? Yeah.
Yes, actually, my question and comment relates to the last question. The Lucas Aerospace is something like 40 years now, I think, coming up the 40-year anniversary of the Lucas Aerospace, and I bet many people here will remember that, with the vision that Shop Stewards Committee had in drawing up a whole alternative production plan to convert from weapons to products of, social necessity. And I think it's very disappointing. My particular disappointment was just after Jeremy's election last year, or no, rather 2015, wasn't it? The Labour Party conference after that, when both Jeremy and John MacDonald both in brilliant speeches to conference, gave an assurance that these skilled jobs in the nuclear defence industry wouldn't be lost, there'd be diversification set up to redeploy them. And what I found very disappointing was the next day that these assurances seem to have been totally ignored by the leaders, in particular of my union, Unite, and the GMB. And I thought, what has happened to the vision, 40 years ago when you looked to deploying? So there's obviously a lot of work to be done in that field. Now, I think there's a number of Unite branches up and down the country. I know mine, I think, is discussing a resolution next week or the week after to get this back on the agenda again, because there's absolutely, we need, I suppose, as a matter of urgency for Labour to commit itself, if it hasn't already done so, to setting up a defence diversification so that we can get these people on board. And as Len McCluskey, was a firm supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, his leadership of the Labour Party, it's quite contradictory in a way that he's taking this position. There might be more in it than meets the eye behind the scenes, I don't know. But certainly a lot to be done in that field, because that is quite an obstacle to our advance.
I can only really have. Yeah, you were first, weren't you? Tom, and then the gentleman here.
About that lady there.
And the lady, and sorry, that will have to be because otherwise we're going to be here late. And can we keep them pretty short?
Pretty short. I'm sorry about United's problems. I'm with Unison. We don't have that problem. Unison supports abandoning Trident. The question really is the fate of the Labour Party Defence Review, which was originally being coordinated by Emily Thornberry. I think it would perhaps solve some of those problems about diversification if there is content in there. And there was also a section in the review about cyber warfare. Now, we've not really heard much from the Labour Party about the results of that consultation, so maybe you'd like to handle that, Kelvin. On the CAAT problem, in St Albans, we've focused attention at St Albans CND on a factory in Hertfordshire that manufactures weapons, and we'd like to get together with CAAT advisors to perhaps get a bit more attention on that particular factory. So maybe, Anne, we could get in touch with you.
Yes, I was glad to hear from some trade union members. I'm an ex-Labour Party member, and I'm not fully aware of what's going on. And I'm not going to pay £7 for a book to tell me what's been happening. But the Labour Party's got itself into a position where they are blatantly hypercritical. Oh, I've got it. Because they're going to organise protests against the demise of the NHS. At the same time, they're supporting the development of Trident. Yeah. And the Trident money works out, in my calculation, we're not given the full facts. That's the whole point that's going with politics today. We don't give the facts of being hidden too far in the Labour Party and elsewhere too. No wonder we've got neo-fascists. Anyhow, the point I want to make is that there's not enough money for Trident and the NHS. Exactly. And until it's proven to me that there isn't, there's no good bellyaching about the NHS if you're prepared to support Trident. I think that point needs to be made. Now, I think the CND are too kind to the Labour Party, and they're not publicising what's going on in the Labour Party. I support the members of the Labour Party that are working to improve the situation, but we've had no parliamentary opposition worth mentioning other than Caroline Lucas and half a dozen Labour MPs. That Trident has gone through on a nod from the pro-war members who don't see anything wrong with wars.
Thank you.
So my point is that can the idea go around? You can't have Trident and NHS.
Lovely. Thank you very much. I think we've got that, and I don't think anyone's going to disagree with you, but pushing it forward, yes, I'm all for it, and they've heard you. Thank you. And one last person, the lady up here.
Thank you. My question is regarding the nuclear ban treaty. Considering most nuclear weapon countries have sort of voted against the resolution, and some are talking about boycotting it, do we have any reason to be optimistic about the fact that something will come up at the end of July and that will make a difference?
Thank you. Would you like to start, Kelvin?
Yes, well, first of all, I think Jeremy absolutely believes that we should get rid of Trident and spend a lot more on the health service. There's no problem there. But as it's been said many times before, the Labour Party is a very broad church. In fact, that's putting it too kindly. The people have fundamentally different religious beliefs, if you like, in political terms. And it is very hard when you've got people in Parliament who take absolutely totally opposed to where we stand. Often for opportunistic reasons, because they think we can't win unless we're gung-ho for nuclear weapons or whatever. And we've seen one of them just recently go from Cumberland, and another one who's just gone from Stoke-on-Trent. Those people have nothing in common with us at all, but they're in the Labour Party. So the Labour Party, when it comes to trade unions, the trade unions are often under pressure from membership, especially when elections are taking place. And there is an election taking place inside Unite at the moment, which has an impact. Once a leader in a trade union has an unassailable position, they're a bit freer to speak with their mind. And I remember, in fact, it's very nice to see my old friend Noel Hayes here. We were at the TUC together 44 years ago. And, So we've had the same views all those times. But politics, is the Labour Party isn't one thing. It is this massive range of views, some polar opposite views on a whole range of issues.
Well, that's the system, the two-party system. I'm a Green.
Okay.
Should Kate go next? Please?
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, very interesting questions. Just on the first one, the friend who was talking about the gig economy and decline of work and so on. I don't know if you've noticed, it's just come out that Labour is launching a consultation on its industrial strategy. And CND is going to be submitting the very detailed paper that we have on Trident and jobs. So all that information will be put into that discussion, and I hope that it gets a fair hearing. Somebody also mentioned a Defence Diversification Agency, and of course we're fully in support of this. You may remember when Jeremy was on the campaign trail in the first instance, one of the policies that he launched before he was elected was his defence diversification policy, and committed himself to an agency and so on. Since then, many of us have been suggesting, I think Kelvin's heard us going on about this as well, that Labour should establish a shadow defence diversification agency before coming into office, precisely to get those trade unions on board. A small number of trade unions, most trade unions in the TUC are opposed to Trident, but the T&G, for example, the GMB, who completely ignore the fact that, Jeremy has said that, when he comes to office, jobs will not be lost, that money will be invested, many more jobs, skilled jobs will be created. They ignore that, I'm sure partly, as other people were saying, for electoral reasons perhaps, and sort of turf wars over membership. That's completely unacceptable. I think if they're drawn in now to a shadow defence diversification agency, that would make quite a lot of difference, one hopes. Just on the Lucas thing, yes, it was the 40th anniversary, and I'm pleased to say that CND was a supporting organisation that's been involved in that process and in the continuing process following up from that. On the NHS not Trident question, I have to say that NHS not Trident has been CND's most popular slogan for decades. It really does touch a popular nerve, because everyone needs the NHS from cradle to grave, and no one wants to see it going down the drain. And we don't want 205 billion spent on Trident when it can be spent on the National Health Service. Yes. So, well, I'm sure they use the services even though they're cutting it. But I'm sure you know that on the 4th of March there is a National Health Service Defend the National Health Service demo, and on that day please come and gather round the blue and white CND NHS Not Trident banner. You know, so that's yet another thing for you to do. And then, somebody said, oh, maybe it was you, said CND was too kind to the Labour Party. Well, I'm not a Labour Party member either, although I have friends, some of my best friends, members of the Labour Party, and as Kelvin says, it's a broad church. But I can assure you that irrespective of who is in the leadership of the Labour Party, if Labour has the wrong policy, CND and Labour CND, of course, will be fighting to change that policy. We're not going to go soft on the Labour Party because Jeremy's the leader. We're going to be fighting to get the kind of policy that he wants for the Labour Party. So, yes, I hope I disabused you of that notion. And then finally, reasons to be optimistic about the ban treaty. Yes, I myself have thought, well, what's the point of having a ban treaty if the nuclear weapon states don't sign up to it? You know, isn't it just an abstract thing? But the reality is, if that treaty is there at the United Nations, it will be much easier to put that pressure on states and get them incrementally or collectively or whatever they want to take the issue seriously and bring them to the negotiating table. I mean, with many treaties and so on, the treaty's been on the table first and then you win people to sign it up. So I think it will be a huge asset for pushing the global disarmament agenda forward.
Yes, I just say, like CND, Campaign Against Arms Trade has been working on this 40 years since the Lucas plan within that group. And that group is continuing to kind of look and see how we can take matters forward on that particular issue. I think Unite is a big problem for us, but is obviously for the arms industry, that's where most of the skilled members are, with GMB, with the less skilled members. And I'm interested, I'd like to speak to you later to find out a bit more about what the Unite branches are actually voting on, because I think that they are a big block to taking that whole work forwards. Having said that, however, they did do, I think it was March 2016, they did bring out a kind of historic summary of arms conversion initiatives, which was actually a very thorough piece of work. I think that was prompted by Jeremy's call for a Defence Diversification Agency. So I think people are at least beginning to think about it again in a way that hasn't been on the agenda for a while. And Campaign Against Arms Trade has mostly been looking at arms to renewables, and we do have various publications on that. So I think I'd say positive and upbeat on that score. Slightly less so that just in this last week we've been a bit worried about the Labour Party again, in that maybe the arms companies have got to Neil Griffiths first. And it's interesting, the Fabian conference is just up the road, and the session at which she's speaking on ethical foreign policy, the chair is from ADS, which is the arms industry trade group. So I was going to go to that and then got invited here, so it's kind of a bit in the middle. But I think we need to be aware of these things. The arms industry is fantastic at lobbying, and we've got to get better at it.
I think that's it then, and thank everybody for coming.